right? So we talked about, it's a good segue into, do these reforms work, right? So during the progressive era, the primary system was implemented in the 1910s. It was meant to take candidate selection out of the hands of party bosses. Um, However, I think we have a pretty clear view today, 120 years later, about how successful that's been, right? They weren't deterred; they simply became the managers of the primaries, right? We always have to remember when we're doing this organizing that is fundamentally anti-capitalist organizing, that capitalism is incredibly adaptable, right? Its ability to adjust to systems of power um, it is really incredible. A lot of it comes with having a lot of money, right? And already having the power. It's easier to adjust if you're already in power and you're sitting on a pile of money. You can shift a lot easier than the grassroots can. Um, but yeah, fundamentally, when we're doing this work, we've got to remember that if we're just slightly tweaking a system, if we're not fundamentally changing things, if we're not fundamentally changing the lay of the land, we're at a disadvantage in terms of who can adapt faster. So if we take one hierarchical system, one anti-democratic hierarchical system that was party bosses choosing candidates, and replace it with a easily manipulated primary system that was in the hands of the states and in the hands of the party bosses, it should be pretty easy to see that capitalism and capitalist parties are going to be able to shift and take advantage of that old system just as much as they did now, as they did the new system just as much as they did the old, which means we have to have some caution, you know, when it comes to isolated reforms today. Um, and one question I always ask, coming from Illinois, what good is RSV if only Republicans and Democrats can get on the ballot? Right there are multiple standalone ranked choice voting bills in the Illinois legislature right now. The Illinois Green Party is actually discussing which ones we should support, and we always support with critical support, right? We support this, but we need X, Y, and Z too. And so when you look at a state like Illinois, where we have some of the worst ballot access repression in the country, where to run for U.S. House from my district where I live in central Illinois as a Republican or a Democrat, it takes between 700 and 800 signatures. To run as a Green Party member, it takes me more than 15,000 in 90 days in a largely rural district. We got to double it, right? So we actually got to get 30,000 signatures in 90 days. And then that's more households that exist in my state capital where I live, right? So we're going to have to go into the deep red country where I grew up to get signatures too. So we can pass ranked choice voting bills in Illinois all we want, right? But it's not going to change anything except internal party politics for the Republicans and Democrats if they implement it in their primaries, which hurts us because it lures us in, right? It lures independents into voting Democrats so they can try to sway those primaries. But in Illinois, if you vote in the Democratic primary, that means there are certain things you're excluded from doing as an independent, right? You can't. People always ask me why I didn't vote in the Democratic primary in 2020, because if I had, I wouldn't have been able to be an electoral college elector for the Greens, right? The law says I can't. And so when we fight for these, another one is term limits, right? Term limits are pushed by people on both sides of the aisle, as a way to counter corruption and career politicians. But will they fundamentally challenge things, or will power be able to pivot, right? Will there, instead of being a career politician, be a line of career politicians ready to take their 8-year stand as U.S. House or as state House members, and then they can switch over and they can run for city or county or state Senate or U.S. Congress, right? Will it just create a revolving door of puppets instead of one corrupt puppet? And when I was thinking about this when I wrote it earlier today, one thing I wondered was, could that make the corruption worse? where you've only got 8 years to fill your pockets. You don't got 30, right? And so now it's a rush of, getting your pet projects done and all that, because you've got a very limited time where you're able to be in power and do it. And my big argument against term limits has always been it hurts working class candidates, right? If you're going to run and then know the job's gone in 4 years because you can only serve 2 terms as a representative, that's a big ask for a working class candidate to put it all on the line, right? To leave the job they have that's feeding their family for a chance at a job that will, knowingly be done and send them into a career reset, unless they can, pivot like the capitalists can, which they likely can't. One thing it makes me think of is in 2020, we had a Green candidate running in Illinois, and he got interviewed by the local paper. And the local paper asked him, how will you deal with surviving on a legislator's salary? Illinois has some of the top paid legislators in the country. They make, I think, 60 to 70,000 baseline, and then you get more based on committee assignments and seniority and stuff. All he could do was laugh, right? He's like, dude, that's double I've ever made in my life.
In Pennsylvania, they make 90,000.
Yeah. Right. And so that's how disconnected the working class is from our political system. And that's because of the, what we talked about, the memberless party structure. Right. And when independent candidates do run, they get asked ridiculous questions like this. Right. Because their opponents are lawyers or their opponents are landlords. I learned the other day, like almost half of Congress is a landlord. And it's like 428 out of the 535, or 228 out of the 535 or something, right? Or their opponent owns huge swaths of farmland across the county, right? And they're going to be slumming it for $60,000 a year. So we have to have a level of caution, especially when we're talking about one-off isolated reforms, right? And this is the one big reason why Greens, Independents, Socialists should be pushing large, broad, omnibus, democracy reforms. Because once we get our ranked choice voting, they're not going to give us anything else for another few decades. That's like one of those once-in-a-generation changes. That means ballot access is off the table, right? That means Citizens United's off the table. That means multi-member districts, which are the real game changer of ending the first past the post system, right? Those are off the table. So we've got to make sure that even when we are advocating for these, one-off reforms, that we're also advocating for the big picture and keeping in mind how, these reforms are being done within the capitalist parties, which means that they're being done within the limits of what these parties think they can survive. They would never put themselves willingly at risk like this, right? If they pass it, it means they think they can continue to dominate in it. So we've got to keep that in mind.
Yeah. I'd add real fast that while this was focused on electoralism, the same is true about union organizing and all that. At this time period, there were radical unions that were really questioning the fundamental tenets of capitalism and the wage labor system itself. And to be part of the New Deal coalition in order to get some reforms instead of major system change, they got involved in the Democratic Party and watered down. And today's unions now are largely managers of capital as opposed to opposing capital itself. So we have to. And again, that's working with capital in the Democratic Party. So it's a caution both from the union side and from the political party side that we have to maintain our independence when we're fighting for a new system.